I decided to pretend to be Mexican.
It's still grocery store tea.
Going Dutch and sitting there and calculating the tab is so tacky to the Chinese.
You can live very differently when it's cheaper. All right, we have a live audience at the West China Teahouse. How cool is this, everybody? This is awesome. Thank you all so much for coming to the first ever live recording of Tea Time with Jesse. I'm here with a very gracious host who is not only here as a host on the channel as a guest, but also this is your tea house, West China Teahouse. Welcome, Sohan. Very cool. So for people on the internet that may not know you, or anybody in the audience that may not know you, who are you? What do you do?
Great, my name's Sohan Fan. I'm the founder of West China Tea, where we are now. We import farm direct tea and artisan teaware like Jesse, and I lived in China for several years as well and source a lot of these teas myself. And yeah, we've had this tea house in this location since 2017. Started the company 10 years ago now, and we've just been building the tea community here in Austin.
That's
and
great.
Also on our website online at westchinatea.com and a bunch of other stuff, Instagram, TikTok, etc.
That's great. Where did you live in China, and then what did you do when you were there?
So I lived in Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province, the capital of Western China, they call themselves. I was doing limnological research there. I majored in...
Wait.
Yeah,
I know a lot of words, but that was not one of the words I knew. What was it?
So you know marine biology?
Yeah.
Limnology is the exact same thing, but without salt. And then I was just living there, doing my life, and I already liked tea. I'd been into Gongfu cha for about 7 years when I moved there in 2010.
Oh, so you knew about Chinese tea before you went there?
Well, I grew up drinking Chinese tea because my dad's from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So I grew up drinking pu'er and tieguanyin and moli hua cha and all these different types of tea when we go get dim sum, which was my only contact with Chinese culture growing up pretty much, was going to eat Chinese food. And I remember really liking the tea as a kid growing up, and then getting into Gongfu cha as an adult and learning the Mandarin names for these. And so I didn't even realize that I'd been drinking a lot of these teas that I got into.
So you kind of had a little bit of a background before.
Yeah, I'd actually even worked at a tea house before I moved to China. I worked at Jade Leaves Tea House, which is now defunct, but a great place to work. My first getting my feet wet in the tea industry, being a tea server at this tea house. And yeah, when I moved there, I was excited. One of the reasons why I chose Chengdu is because there are three things it's famous for: is good tea, good food, beautiful women, and
Good place.
Yeah, exactly.
So you found yourself in Chengdu, and I know that you like white tea. So the first tea that I picked to make for you is this 2017 Dahao Bai Lu Bai Cha White Dew white tea. This is definitely one of my favorite types of tea. Like anybody who's gone to my shop before knows that, like you, I also love the fooding white teas. So this is good, and about this age is kind of where I feel like everything is going well. I've heard it a couple times over here at the tea house, but they have that saying, the 1年好, 3年药, 7年饱, which is 1 year is good tea, 3 years is medicine, and 7 years is a treasure. You smell there. Has a good aginess. And it's actually, this will be interesting because usually the people that I have on the show are not tea people, so they're always like, oh, it's good. But then they don't say very much else over that, but you're actually a tea person. So if you'd like to pour, you can pour on Chonky Horse.
Chonky Horse.
Chonky Horse is a unit. Look at this guy. It was funny, one of the people in the audience is followed online and saw Chonky Horse, and he's like, oh, he's bigger in person. Like, whoa, this is like a tea pet, it's like tea pet celebrity. So we'll make over here.
What's his Chinese name? Pang Pang Ma?
Oh, I showed you that, how do you say chonk in Chinese? It's like pang zai or something like that. I don't know why I want to go into...
Xiao Pangzi.
Yeah,
I had a friend whose nickname was Xiao Pangzi, little fatty.
Little fatty.
In China. And that's just cool.
This is what they say.
People, I'll go back to China and my friends will be like, oh, you got fatter.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's not an insult there. They're just like, oh, your body has changed. You're bigger now.
So here we go. Enjoying the white tea. That's for you. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks for having me to Austin.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
It's good. What do we think?
Delicious. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so
little apricot note.
He has better adjectives than me. I like it. Back to our conversation. So, what was the best part about living in Chengdu?
Oh man, I loved it. Everything. I would just wake up and just be like, what a glorious day. There's trash burning on the street. And I'm just like walking through the smoke of this trash. I'm like, I love Chengdu. And, you know, I think, I mean, obviously the 3 things that I said that were good are in fact really, really great about Chengdu. The pace of life, like you said, there's more tea houses in Chengdu than there are in Shanghai. And
Really?
Shanghai is way bigger than Chengdu,
Yeah.
many times bigger than Chengdu.
Well, not even per capita, just more of them.
There's more of them,
Oh, wow.
just straight, you know, numerically, there's more tea houses in Chengdu than in Shanghai. And that's something I love about Chengdu is that they're really down to slow down and then just enjoy their lives. And also, I don't know, I'm curious what your experience was. I found that in Chengdu and maybe in China in general, things that are way more difficult than they really need to be here are not as difficult in China, such as like, I don't know, like I got a motorcycle when I was living in China and it was like $400 cash.
Yeah.
I didn't have a driver's license in
Yeah.
China, but
No,
they didn't care.
they didn't
I
care.
rode it off the lot. I'd never ridden a motorcycle
Yeah.
before. They didn't care. I rode it off the lot, you know?
They're like, I remember that when I was getting my first e-bike, I had an electric motorcycle. And the first one I got, which was just like a little dinky, you know, whatever, a little mini one, I asked the guy at the front, I was like, how much it cost? He's like, oh, I think it was 2,000 kwai, which is like 300 bucks. And, you know, I give him the money in cash. He gives me the keys. I'm like, are we done? He looked at me like I was weird. It's like, are we not done? like, what do you want me to do for you, man? Like, you know, you have the keys. And I'm like, do we need plates? And then he thought a moment. No. I was like, okay, well, that's good. So like, it is weird how like some of the stuff that here is like very, you know, we think of China as a bureaucracy, but like there's a lot of stuff here that is like very bureaucratic and over there is not a problem.
Yeah.
And then especially in Chengdu, they have that saying, you know, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. Chengdu is probably Wild West, literally,
Oh, yeah.
literally Wild West.
I would call it that when I lived there. It's like we're the Wild West.
I seem to remember you told me a story that you were a musician and performer in Chengdu.
Yeah.
Do you guys know this? That he did music in China? Tell him what was your stage. What was your stage name?
Well, I'll give a little background.
Okay.
You know, if you're a foreigner, I don't know how it is now, but back when I was living in China, if you're a foreigner in China, you can get paid to perform doing whatever, and they don't care if you are good at doing that thing at all. They just want you to be a foreigner on stage. And so I had all these friends who made a living being professional Laowai, based professional foreigners, going and being at a party and just talking to people, or pretending to be a doctor, or for an advertisement, or playing music. And they are not, and you show up at a gig and they're like, you and you're a band now.
Yeah.
You've never met each other, but you're a band now. Go sing Hotel California. And so they love Hotel and Country Roads.
Country Roads, John Denver.
Yeah, they love those
my
ones.
God.
And so I wanted to do that because, hey, it's like easy money. And I was a singer-songwriter. I played guitar and sang, and I had a bunch of songs. And I would go to these gigs, and they'd be like, how come this one looks Chinese? And I'm like, I'm half Chinese. My dad's from Hong Kong. And they'd be like, okay, we'll pay you half as much as a real foreigner. Yeah, and so I decided to pretend to be Mexican, like you do, because they don't really know what Mexicans look like.
They don't know enough.
They don't really have a lot of Mexicans in China, and so I could get away with it. They're like, sure, okay, whatever. And so my stage name that they thought was my actual name was Enchilada Grande. And they called me Enchi for short.
Enchi.
Yeah, Enchi. And I'd play La Bamba and Celito Lindo, and then we also, me and my housemate Lance, he was also a musician. We had a little band called Benjamin B and the Pillow Biters, and so we would came up with these really not even like PG-13 obscene versions of Hotel California and
people don't know what you're saying.
And most of the time people didn't know what we were saying, except sometimes one guy did.
Yeah, and then you see somebody in the back on. What would you say on a day-to-day life is like kind of the biggest misconceptions Americans have about living in China?
Oh, I mean, one is that it's this like you're saying earlier, that's just like this hyper bureaucracy, police state, like censorship all over the place. And honestly, I felt a lot freer living in China than I do in America, mostly because of the shackles of economic oppression. Just going to say that.
It's cheaper. I mean, you can live very differently when it's cheaper.
Absolutely.
Like there's a lot of choices. Like when I first moved there, like to do comedy full time, I think a lot of people are like, whoa, that's really brave. But like part of it wasn't necessarily even that. I was like, even what you like, there were always going to be some ways of making enough money you could pay rent.
Yeah.
And the food was really cheap, and it was good.
And really good.
And so it was like, well, if I can pay my rent and I can eat out as much as I want and the food is good, like that was enough when I was 22, where I was like, this is worth giving it a shot.
Absolutely.
Whereas like, I don't think that if I had graduated from college and had been like, I want to try to be a comedian or performer in America of any sort, like, I live in LA, like the rent is nuts. The rent is nuts everywhere.
Yeah.
And so like you make very different choices if that's the case. So,
absolutely.
So like what were some of the things that you felt were just like great deals in China?
Oh, we could take a nap at work. That was cool. That was like allowed. We had like siesta time every day after lunch.
This was before work from home where you could like put up a cardboard cutout of yourself in front of the Zoom camera.
Right, yeah, and like my boss had a cot in her office. Like it was not like you're sneaking away to take a nap. It's like, okay, nap time everybody. It's like kindergarten again. And so just the relaxed attitude towards work, and people just weren't just hustling all the time. People were enjoying their lives, and I think also I used to have dreadlocks down to my butt before I moved to China. Yeah, long
Can we
dreads.
cut to a picture of that?
Yeah.
What is it?
And then I cut them off before I moved to China because I'm going to be a researcher. I need to be taken seriously. I don't want to stand out as a foreigner. I want to be respectable. No one would have.
You don't want to be the limnologist with dreads.
Right, I did. Although in retrospect, it would have been fine. Nate remembers my dreads. He remembers those. He was there when we got them cut off. And so I remember coming there with this really, even as a Chinese American, coming there, it's like, okay, I'm gonna watch my wallet and watch my stuff all the time, and if I see a cop, just act cool, be natural. Yeah. I remember being at a red light on my illegal motorcycle, and normally I would just go through the red lights if there's no one coming, because there are traffic customs.
It's a suggestion.
It's a suggestion, traffic suggestions, at least in Chengdu in 2010.
Yeah.
And I remember coming up to a red light, and I was like, oh, there's a cop here, I better stop. And I stop, and then the cop looked both ways, runs the red light. I'm like, all right, here we go. We're just going to run this red light together.
What's he gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. As long as I don't pass him, I'm good. Yeah, and then I'd say just the sense of community. I remember living in a little xiaochu in Chengdu, the little apartment complex courtyard area where I live. If my clothes would get holes in them, and there's a lady with a sewing machine in the courtyard every single day, and you take down a whole pile of clothes to her, and then you pick them up 3 days later, and they're all fixed, and it costs $1.80.
Yeah,
or something
it's
that.
Crazy. That was one of the best things about having the motorbike and just living in China in general was they hadn't evolved economically to the point where they threw away stuff just because it was cheaper to buy new stuff. So whether that's evolution or not, but it was nice because it kind of felt like it was also a community sense of thing. I had my guy who repaired my e-bike. I had the place where I could get dry cleaning done. I had the fruit stand lady.
Yes.
You could have all these people that were very close by, and it was all kind of walking distance, which was really nice.
And they know you, and they're like, oh, your grapes are free today because whatever. I just feel like giving you free
it's
grapes.
free grape day. You didn't know that? Traditional holiday.
I remember getting stuck in a restaurant, my first day moving into my new apartment, and just being on my own. I didn't speak very good Chinese at the time. No one I knew spoke English because my roommate who did speak English, who's an American, was in another province on a work trip. And so I was just all by myself in Chengdu, first week in Chengdu, going to this little restaurant by the hospital. And I'm in there, it starts raining, and the boss just gives me an umbrella. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank you so much. I'll come bring it back, tomorrow. And they're like, whatever. It's fine, just keep it. And I was like, wow, that's really nice and easy. And now I'm just not having to walk home in the rain. And also I love the way that people will not let you pay for your own food.
Oh yeah, if you go out with friends or especially if you're in a meeting, any sort of thing like that, they will just they'll refuse. They'll fight you hard.
They will fight you physically. They will pull you away and maybe put you on the ground if they have to prevent you from paying for your own food. And the idea of going Dutch and everyone paying for their own stuff and sitting there and calculating the tab is so tacky to the Chinese. It is the height of gauche. And I really appreciate that there's less of this calculating. Everyone's kind of trying to get theirs.
It feels like there is, because what it does is it kind of ties people together. It's well, if you meet a new friend or whatever, it's well, I'll hang out with you again. We won't, if you split the bill, you could kind of never see each other again. And so it's weird because I felt as an American in the beginning, it made me uncomfortable to be indebted to people. Yeah. But then later I was oh, that's kind of what makes everything work. Is they're not big debts. It's not like you're gonna be in real trouble if you don't treat the other guy out. But even that little stuff, it's like, it kind of is like when you have a good friend and you look at each other and you don't need to talk, you kind of know what's going on. It kind of felt like the whole society ran that way a little bit, in a way that, like, you know, in the States, it's like you have that within communities, but if you go out into the world, like, you know, you're not going to go to like, you're not going to go to Burger King and the boss is like, yeah, we got you. Like, you know, like, what? Like, that's not going to happen. We're going to take a little bit of a quick break. We're going to be back with another tea, and thank you all so much for coming to the live recording of Tea Time with Jesse. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, Jesse here, just preparing to send this episode out. I wanted to give you guys a discount code, Sohan So Good. That's gonna give you 10% off any order on the shop. So if you wanna get some of the tea that we featured in this episode or anything else, you should go get it. Also, if you're having a great time listening to this conversation, you know you're gonna want more, or you wanna listen to it while you're driving, we actually do have an audio podcast. It's an hour long, it's the full episode, the whole thing, lots of great tea conversation with Sohan. That's available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Tea Time with Jesse. Thank you again for listening. We're back with the second half. And we're back at West China Teahouse with a live studio audience. Oh! We're going to be drinking a second tea. This next one is actually one I'm super excited to get your take on, because this is my tea guy Duidui's 2010 Reserve Ancient Tree Cooked Pu'er tea. So Duidui is a friend of mine that I met through tea friends. He was one of the first people to notice in the domestic Chinese market that the ancient tree tea was just better.
Yeah.
So like 30 years ago, people knew that, like, oh, those trees are older, but they didn't know that the leaves were that much better. And now in the last 30 years, there's not only scientific evidence, but everybody who drinks tea, if you drink a lot of pu'er tea, you know that you get better depth of flavor and all sorts of stuff out of that. So he set up his relationships with these farmers like 30 years ago. And a lot of these tea farmers, they have, you know, they're super lucky, it feels to me, because they had the trees on their land.
Yep.
And every year they just hire some people to go pick them. And then some of them like really care and they do the processing themselves. Others, they're like, I'm happy to sell all my tea to one guy and then have him sell it away. And then once they have that guy, they just don't switch.
Yep.
So Duidui got in with a lot of those people. He had his tea people. And he bought up a lot of ancient tree tea for really good prices, including this stuff from 2010, which you can take a look here at the tea cake. So it's just really, really nice. Ancient tree pu'er. Got the tea cake for you guys to take a look at. And this is from Sichuan Bana. And this stuff is like really, really nice. And I get, I'm interested to hear your take on it. I get like a little bit of like a jujube, like, you know, Hongzao sort of flavor to it. For people that haven't had a lot of cooked pu'er, this is gonna taste different from what you think tea tastes like.
Right.
You know, so like a lot of people are like, oh, tea, you know, they may even be thinking of green tea. This is about as far to the other side as you could go. Super dark, super earthy, very rich. I almost like think of, I went to Spain once and I had like Mexican, like Spanish drinking chocolate. You know, like that sort of like thicker stuff. If you were to steep this long, that's kind of what it tastes like. It's like really, really got some pop to it. So excited to hear what you think about it. Are you a cooked pu'er guy? Are you a raw pu'er guy? Are you a, I assume you drink pu'er.
I sure do.
We've talked about this.
Yeah, sheng, uncooked, well, you know, it's funny, nomenclature-wise. They're all cooked, but the unfermented one, sheng pu'er, is actually my favorite kind of tea overall.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
so look at that color. So it's a little bit tricky to tell, although you can tell from our perspective, if you put it right through the light, as dark as it is, it's still transparent.
Yeah.
It's still really
hold
clear.
It up to this lamp back there.
See if maybe, I don't know if it'll show through for your guys. It'll depend on where your eyes are, but if you can get it there, it's like really, really dark, but still quite clear.
Yeah, you don't want it to be cloudy.
Yeah, cloudy, that's one of the ways a lot of times, I feel so bad, like sometimes people will be like really curious and they'll be like, I found, like I heard about pu'er online and then I bought some on Amazon or wherever, and then it's like, it tastes like fish or it's like, it's not that good. I'm like, it's almost assuredly like bad pu'er,
Right.
but this is not bad pu'er. Cheers.
Cheers.
There we go. See what you think of that.
Oh yeah.
Duidui is just like a super solid guy, because like this easily could have been sold to me for 4 times the price that I put it on my shop, and it's like he gave us a good deal on it so we could put it in the subscription. So
Yeah, like malty,
yeah,
leathery, got some nice like leathery, like saddle-y kind of notes.
sadly I like it. I got to come up with better adjectives. I learned a lot of my tea adjectives in Chinese, and then I came back to the States and like, what does it taste like? I'm like, how do you say like 浓郁? Like, you know.
Right.
Like, you know, sort of like rich, very kind of rich flavor. The white tea that we had in the first half is a better tea if you're just going to like, I want to drink some big cups of tea. This is like, I want to sip it a little bit slowly, because if you chug this, it'd be a little bit much. So let's talk about tea, because you're also a tea guy. And you said that you'd started drinking Chinese tea in your family. You kind of came through the Hong Kong tradition. What do Hong Kongers drink at home?
Like this.
This is what they drink?
Yeah, fermented pu'er.
Yeah.
That's what they love. They call it bolei cha. And they, you know, my dad's from Hong Kong, and it's very humid there. And so the pu'er that lives in Hong Kong, that gets aged in Hong Kong, is what we call wet stored pu'er, as opposed to dry stored pu'er. If you've got the pu'er aging in Yunnan, in kind of a higher, drier climate, then it ends up being dry stored, and it changes more slowly, but I feel like it retains a lot of the nuance, whereas the wet stored pu'er gets dark and funky earthy really fast.
It oxidizes fast.
Yeah.
So you would drink stuff like this growing up, and then you went to China, and like, when did you realize like, oh, there's many different types of tea?
It was in college, you know, so the timeline, I was born.
Okay, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
He's like, let me tell you the timeline of how this happened. I was born. I'm like, oh my God. When are we getting to the end of this story?
Born, dim sum, college.
Okay.
And in college, I was introduced to the practice of Gongfu cha and the kind of culture of trying a diversity of teas around that. Because when I was growing up, there was pu'er, with chrysanthemum gukbo, there was tea gunyam, which is tie guanyin, iron goddess of mercy, oolong, heng bean, which is how they say mo li hua cha.
Okay.
Very, very different. And very occasionally we'd get saomi, which is shomei, the aged white tea. And that was pretty much it. Those are the kinds of teas that we had access to. And I was in high school when I first thought I wanted to get into tea, because there was this great scene in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon where Michelle Yeoh drops a gaiwan in midair and Zhang Ziyi like catches it in midair and it reassembles itself, this thing, a gaiwan, which is almost impossible to do, and that's like how you know Zhang Ziyi's the secret ninja. And I was like, Dad, what are these things that they're drinking tea with? And he's like, oh, it's like a little teapot, you drink out of it, because that's traditionally what you do with a gaiwan, is you drink right out of it. And so I went to the Chinese grocery in Houston, where we have lots of Chinese people, and I bought a gaiwan, and I bought some really crappy jasmine tea and tried to go home and make it, and the gaiwan was so bad and the tea was so bad that I just gave up.
It's really kind of unfortunate. Like, a lot of times people ask online, they're like, oh, can I get this at a grocery store or anything like that? And the way I kind of look at it is like the different tiers of teas. You have Western grocery store tea, Chinese or Asian grocery store tea, which will be better, but it's still fundamentally a mass production product that was put together by a company for mass distribution. I actually thought originally I might be able to source, or not source, but like get the Chinese tea into Asian grocery stores, and I found out they're like, no, we have a contract with somebody, they send us all the tea in the box beforehand. It's like, it is, even though it is better, it is still a mass market product, and then it's like, the worst stuff you can find at the tea market will actually be better than the best stuff you can find at the Asian grocery in the States. Or even in China, like if you go to a grocery store in China, it's still grocery store tea. And it'll be better than what you can get in the Asian groceries in the States, but it's not the same like path of the tea. And then it occurred to me, it's like, oh, of course there's gonna be a market for tea that is different than just a consumable product, like, with the bag. So you failed to get into tea.
Tried, failed. Went to college.
Born again.
Right.
And
then I one day I was on the other side of town to go to a glass shop to get something made of glass. And
as you do. Real casual.
And,
real casual.
And I saw across the street was a little shop called Chai Kana Tea Culture, and this is in Santa Cruz, California. Go Slugs. And I went into this, I was like, that looks cool. I went to the shop, and there was a man named David Wright, who, Jewish dude, a little older than us, pouring tea, wearing Chinese robes in the back of this, like, you ever see Gremlins? you know the little shop where he steals Gizmo from? There's all this crazy
water
stuff.
On the,
Exactly. He actually still has a tea shop in Santa Cruz. If you find yourself in Santa Cruz, go to Hidden Peak Teahouse. So I got into it. I bought a tea set. I was 20 years old, so I've been doing this more than half my life now. I turned 40 this year. And so I was 20 years old. I wasn't old enough to buy alcohol, but I bought a tea set. I could buy tea, and I bought some tea. with my college budget, and came home and I would make tea for my housemate, my girlfriend, and everything, and then that just became what we did for fun. That just became our social thing that we did. By the time I was 21, there was no room in my life for social drinking. I was already drinking tea socially, and so I started right off my adulthood drinking tea, doing Gongfu cha, and making that the center of my social life. And that's when I really got into it.
It really has that like effect. It's like it's sort of weird. It's a very subtle but a big statement if you go into a space and there's like a tea table on the living room table, and it's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit. We're going to drink tea. And it's like, you don't have to, obviously, but it's like it creates that environment where like we're going to socialize. So you got into the Gongfu tea. And then when you moved to China, I'm assuming it just like supercharged.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into Gongfu cha, and then I was doing that for years and years and years. And I moved to China in 2010, and it was like, I'd never seen a living tea plant before, and I'd never had farm direct tea. I'd had good, like you're talking, there's all these grades of tea. You've got like the worst of the worst, just like commodity tea sold to Western market, then commodity tea to the Chinese market, and then like, more artisan, but still more or less factory tea, like beings of Pu'er with the serial number, at the tea house. And then my first day in my office in Chengdu where I worked, we were an environmental organization, so we would help these farmers go organic, and you stop using pesticides, start composting and everything like that. And so one of the farms that they'd worked with was a tea farm, and they had this green tea, Su Maofeng, just very basic, the most basic tea that you would drink in Sichuan province, just there in a jar on the table. And I just made myself like a paper cup of this tea with hot water, and it was the best green tea I'd ever had. After 7 years of getting the best tea that I could afford and trying to, make it and drink it, and I love green tea. I was like, this is the best green tea I've ever had. And I was like, what is this tea called? And they're like, it doesn't really have a name, just Maofeng, It's a kind of generic name for green tea. If you don't want to call it something else, you call it Maofeng. And then people knew that I was into tea, so my coworkers would introduce me to tea farmers, tea masters, people that they knew. And that was, and so I just, when I had time off, I was working, doing research, and then I had time off for, a couple of days off, I would go up to the tea mountains, go to Emeishan with my freaking guitar and everything, my tent, and go to, took a trip to Yunnan, just like got off of a, taxi in a tea mountain, and it's like, well, I'm here. What was the way that you decided that like, oh, this is somebody that I actually want to work with and bring their tea to the States, and where do you go like, I don't actually really want to work with you? Right. What was your internal compass? Well, it's interesting because I didn't meet people with the intention of starting a tea company. I was just an enthusiast going off and enjoying my time off by engaging in my hobby and getting in touch with the people who make the thing that I enjoy. And so like Li Shulin, who makes our pu'ers, and Ding Ding Xiang, who makes our green teas, our Sichuanese green teas, the jasmine that I made earlier, and some of these initial tea people that I met, I just met them as an enthusiast. I was like, really, I went to Nanwo Mountain because I wanted to see what these ancient trees looked like. I wanted to see a big, tall, ancient tea tree and like touch it and chew on a leaf, et cetera. And so I just showed up, Nanwo Mountain, showed up on a break, and there's no bus stop there. You have to tell the driver that you get on the bus from Jinghong to Menghai, and you tell them, I want to get off on Nanwo Mountain. Yep. And then if you want to get down off the mountain, you got to hitchhike down because there's no bus stop. Those buses are, it's funny, like the buses, I'm glad I was asleep for that first bus ride, because the mountain roads there are so windy that the second time I went on them when it was daytime, I was like, every single blind curve, I'm like, and this is how I die. So you've now, been back in the States, you've opened this tea house as a way to help educate people about tea. What do you think is like the biggest misconception that Americans have about tea? Tea is what you call any plant steeped in hot water. That is the #1 misconception that Americans have about tea. And that is like, and it's a sensitive thing to bring up because people feel like people love their tea. Yeah, they love their sleepy time or like lemon zinger or whatever. And then you have to be like, oh, it's not really tea. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not technically tea because tea is the name of a plant. And so it's a very sensitive conversation to have. And I have it all the time, every day. Yeah. Because the majority of people who come in here, or maybe at least half, are not familiar with Chinese tea culture, and they don't know that tea is the name of a plant. It's very complicated, and of course, you can't expect them to know that. Yeah.
And so coming back here when I'm dealing with the people who are, you know, interested in China, I get a lot of comments on the internet. They're like, I had this sleepy time tea from this one tea house 14 years ago and I've always missed it. Can you find it for me? I'm like, how do you deal with having to re-educate Americans about tea or anything with Chinese culture and don't just go crazy?
You know, I really love introducing people to tea. It's still fun for me, and I'm not sick of it yet. So I just try to be really down to earth and you know, gentle with that revelation, so that people don't feel like they're being judged or talked down to. There is a strong tendency, you know, as we talked about this earlier when we were having tea, that like in China, Chinese tea culture is very down to earth.
Yeah.
It's very chill. If we were doing this in China, there would be people for sure smoking cigarettes inside while we were doing this.
Yeah.
And it's very friendly and casual. And there's this tendency in America for people to elevate it and make it a ceremony or make it this formal thing.
So yeah, it's definitely, it is like that and it's one of the elements I try to bring about. Like we were talking about this earlier, how I'll take, like, you know, I have my tea pet is called Chonky Horse. And when I first put my first picture of Chonky Horse up on the internet, I just put underneath it, I said, "Oh Lord, he coming," and unit. And it was like, it was one of those moments where I realized it's like, this is maybe what, like maybe that's the American version of making people comfortable with tea. And I didn't do it on purpose, like this was a plan. It was like I want people to have fun having tea and just be like talking like they would normally. And even though there is a high-end Chinese tea ceremonial culture,
absolutely,
it's almost like fashion. It's like you can get a $5 thing from the thrift shop, and if you style it well, you can have your own fashion, or you can have a $30,000 jacket or whatever. Like they're both fashion, but you know, you get the choice to do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
Before we finish, I want to do a couple like little lightning response questions.
Got it.
So just like, you know, one sentence, max two, but just like, you know, figure it out. So what's the hardest thing about running a tea company?
It's very new, and so you always have to educate. Yeah, you always have to educate. Very few people are coming in here with you know, pre-existing knowledge of the subject.
Very cool. What's the most fun thing about running a tea house?
Drinking tea with people and going to China and sourcing tea.
Nice.
Those are my
Very
favorite
good.
parts of the job.
What's your favorite place to go in China?
Ooh, I love Guizhou. Chengdu is always my like Laojia in China, and I love Guizhou, and of course I love Yunnan. So the Southwest, I'd say, the South. Very broad answer, but the Southwest of China.
I like that. You had 4 answers, and you're like, but it's only one. I like that. If you had only one type of tea that you had to drink forever, what would it be?
Shengpu'er.
Shengpu'er. That was fast.
Yeah.
You was fast.
my
I
blood
like
type.
that. I like that. What advice would you have for people that are just starting their tea journey?
Have fun. Have fun with it, and you're not going to offend my ancestors if you know, mess it up and do it wrong. And yeah, enjoy yourself and share it with people, and just follow your passion and your enjoyment of it.
Nice. Thank you again, Sohan, for not only being on the podcast, but inviting us to use your space to be able to host it, and for hosting all these other people as well. And I just want to thank everybody who came and showed up for the live recording of Tea Time with Jesse. I'm Jesse. We'll see you next time.